Begin in just a moment. Thank you.
Ooh. So I'm actually going to start by making somebody in this room very happy, I predict. Are you watching? You paying attention? It's a BlackBerry. Someone left it on a chair last session. Okay. We'll keep it up here at the podium, and if you talk to any of your neighbors and they're looking for their BlackBerry, here it is. So we're going to get started. We'll let people drift in as they wish. Title of this panel is called Dollars and Cents. We're mostly going to talk here about agricultural policies on a global basis. We're also going to talk about markets and take a little detour into organics with one of our panelists here. So let me, got it? Great. Are you happy?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me introduce the panel. Briefly, I may do a little longer introduction as we get to your part of the program, but on my far right is a familiar face to many folks at CropLife, Bill Buckner. Bill's now president and CEO of the Samuel Roberts Nobel Foundation, formerly with Bayer Crop Science. Next to Bill there is John Scholl. John is president of the American Farmland Trust. Next to John is Max Safarpour. Did I get that right, Max?
Correct.
Max is Vice President Global Regulatory Affairs at BASF Corporation. And to my immediate right here is Kellee James. Kellee is the founder and CEO of a startup we're going to hear a little more about called Mercaris. So we don't, as you all know, have one system for regulating food around the world. We probably have more systems than anyone could count. And I want to start the conversation by telling you about something I learned last night, which is that strawberries sometimes wind up, perfectly good strawberries sometimes wind up being dumped into the ocean because of something called MRL, which stands for maximum residue limits. So I'm going to turn to Max. He brings a truly global perspective, I think more than anyone else in the room, to the CropLife Forum today. He was born in Azerbaijan. He was educated in Iran. Then he went to Turkey. Then he went to Germany. Then the real culture shock, Texas A&M and the University of Arkansas, where he earned a PhD in agricultural chemistry. So Max, you told me the story, I think it was apocryphal, but I'm sure it's actually happened as well, about strawberries being dumped into the ocean. How and why does that happen?
Well, thank you so much, first of all, Mark. And I speak English with Texan accents. So I have to understand what I'm going to try to say here, because as a young boy immigrated to Texas from the cowboy movies influence. So hope you will understand. First of all, you have to understand, Mark and I, we had a good conversation. That's why he's bringing this up. And I was trying to tie this quickly last night, which I will explain briefly to you. What are the implications of the fractured regulatory system, global regulatory system, and what are their impacts? Tremendous impact. We may not realize this. Not only has in the crop protection industry, and which we can discuss it later on if you wish, but also in food production and food distributors and economic development. And in terms of the maximum residue limits, what happens here, we have revolutionized agriculture in North America. It takes 8 years, we bring the new active ingredients to the market. And you know that what it costs. I don't have to tell you, almost $265 million bring a new AIs here. So that's why we have the new tool in the toolbox always for grower. That's how we are revolutionized. We are innovative country. This is something I learned as a young boy. This is a democracy. Here, this is why we will always have the innovation, regardless of any sector or any segment. And it's not like other part of the world, they are not they don't have that democracy. Where innovation comes with a democracy. We have innovative product in the market, then growers are using it, mega growers, small farmers, and anyone else. And then fractured global regulatory system becomes a hinder here. What does it mean? That means from Northwest Pacific as an example, or California, we have 3 nuts and wine, perishable food, vegetables gets shipped. Growers, they have to ship it with globalization to other parts of the world, Asia Pacific, China, Taiwan, Korea, and all those. Then we do not have the harmonized global MRL, maximum residue limits, ultimately has a negative impact, not only our exporter and importers, and our growers, our own homeland here, even I wear a global hat in this country, and goes back to other countries, they don't have the tolerances, limits varies country by country, overnight changes. Then what happens, all the commodity gets shipped, dumped to the ocean because it did not meet that criteria, what US EPA has established the tolerances. Because you put the science behind of this, you establish tolerances based on the scientific data in the environmental protection agencies. Now it gets shipped out and gets dumped in the ocean. That has happened for shipload of the broccolis in the ice. What are you going to do with it? Or perishable food, strawberry, the same.
So what you're saying is there's a tolerance here in the U.S. It might be a lower level, let's say hypothetically in Japan. Why would it's not the farmer at this point, I guess the distributor, why would you put those strawberries on a boat and send them to Japan if you knew they wouldn't meet the tolerance? First question. And second, are they actually testing these things at the shores?
Good point, brought it up. First of all, strawberry is a perishable fruit. It gets lifted by airplane, by the way. Goes to Germany. Some other perishable foods, and most of them actually gets lifted by cargo plane going by Anna or whatever to Japan or Korea and Taiwan and others. You do have tolerance established, as I said, with the scientific requirements within the US, but still lack of global harmonization. In this segment, this is the fractured global regulatory system causes this dilemma. They don't have registration approval for a specific product. Other part of the world, they set automatically default values, the lowest number you can ever imagine, which has passed all the scientific risk assessment within the regulatory environment in Canada and US, and scientifically sound rugged. But this is the fractured regulatory system, is the lack of harmonization globally. Ultimately has an impact for growers. Ultimately has an impact for crop protection industry. And you cannot be able to sell the product. You have the row crops, soybean and corn, you cannot ship it to other parts of the world. What are you going to do with that? These are the challenges, this maximum residue levels, the import tolerances globally, it is really bringing and ultimately has effect in our growers and our industry and for a country like ours.
Well, we'll come back to the question of what we do about that in a moment. But Bill, before I ask you to put your Bayer hat on, you've been at your new job for, I guess, 18 months. Just tell us briefly what you're doing there, and then we'll get back to the topic of Bayer.
Sure, I'd be glad to. Well, as you mentioned, I work for the Samuel Roberts Nobel Foundation in Ardmore, Oklahoma. And the Nobel Foundation truly is a unique place in that it's the only private foundation in the United States that actually does agricultural research. And we have three basic divisions: a plant science group that does basic plant research, a forage improvement development group, which in the crop protection side would be your field development group, to bring new varieties of forages primarily to the southwest portion of the Great Plains. And then an agricultural group that does consultation and applied ag research for both plants and livestock. And we wrap it all into one unit, and we do a lot of great things.
So you employ scientists, basically.
I'm sorry?
You employ or contract with scientists.
We do. We have 380 employees there and about 120 scientists from 35 different countries. So it's a pretty active place.
That's great. So did the story Max tell about MRLs and strawberries come as a surprise to you?
No, I'm having flashbacks. No, it's a serious issue that, and not only on the crop protection side of the equation, but on the biotech side as well. We really do need to fix the harmonization situation around the globe, and
So let's dig in a little bit. Tom Philpott, formerly of Grist, now he writes about agriculture for Mother Jones. He was here a year or two ago, I think. Has a story that I dug out. The headline is 7 Dodgy Food Practices Banned in Europe, but Just Fine Here. He's calling them dodgy. So it's things like atrazine, which people in this room know something about, I'm sure, arsenic in chicken, turkey, and pig feed, chlorine washes for poultry carcasses. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them here. Gestation crates, antibiotics as growth promoters, etc. So these would all be examples of practices or chemicals that essentially the EU has said no, we've said okay. So what's the impact on trade of all this sets of rules? We're not going to debate who's right and who's wrong, but let's talk about what it means to try to live by those different sets of rules. And you were working for a company headquartered in Europe, correct?
that's correct.
It's the aspirin people, among other things.
Well, we at Bayer, we tried to harmonize our activities internally too, and adapt to the nature of the regulatory environment. Every now and then you'd get out of step in terms of, as Max was describing, you'd have a registration of one product in one country, but you really can't launch it until the MRLs are established in a consistent manner and across the other areas. But you're never, I say you never, we hope to get to a point where we can find harmonization within the regulatory system as well as within our companies, but it's a trick that you have to play out. And you have the cultural differentials by countries as well, and this is what we were associated with at Bayer, dealing with the European mindset versus a North American mindset per se, or a Latin American mindset. And so you just have to work within the confines of all of that. But I think overall, at least during my time with Bayer, we were very conscious in terms of the products that we had on the market around the world. And as products were leaving the markets, we were conscious to find and produce those replacements. And I think that's the key. If these other products are here, we have an obligation to continue to research to find replacement products for those. If there's not, we also have an obligation to make sure that those products are staying in the marketplace where farmers can use them as another tool in their tool chest. And that's the real crux that we seem to be running into all the time.
So am I right in saying that the upshot of those kinds of non-tariff trade barriers would be, let's assume it's chickens going to Europe or strawberries to Japan, just again being totally hypothetical here. The U.S. producers are disadvantaged. The European and Japanese consumers don't have the opportunity to get what presumably is either a higher quality or lower priced product. Fair conclusion? Yes. So is there any evidence that if this were true, Europeans would be paying somewhat higher either food prices or percentage of their income for food? Is that true, or do you know?
Well, I heard Secretary Vilsack say this morning that we're paying about 10%, and the Europeans are paying about 20% of every dollar for food. So I would say, based on your question, yes.
And how about deployment of jobs? You had to make decisions at Bayer about, where to put your researchers, where your company is going to grow. Did it have an impact there?
It did. We'd made the conscientious decision to move biotechnology activities to the United States. BASF has done the same. Syngenta just expanded their operations in Research Triangle Park. Monsanto never did. They pulled out in the early beginnings. So you can only push a rock up a hill so far, and then you have to realize that, again, culturally, it's not worth the climb, but there are markets that will accept your technology, and you keep trying to produce those technologies for those available markets.
Well, we'll definitely come back to it, Bill and Max, to talk about, whether we even want to do anything about this, or whether a sort of diversity of regulatory schemes is good, just like a diversity of products in a supermarket is a good thing, and then what we might do about it. But I want to bring Kellee and John into the conversation first. So when we have regulations, and or at least some combination of regulation and consumer demand, that creates business opportunities, and that's what you're working on, correct, Kellee?
Right. Yep.
Why don't you explain, I should also mention, Kellee comes out of the world of climate change. She worked at Chicago Climate Exchange, and she was a White House Fellow in 2009, 2010. That's a very sought-after honor. But why don't you tell us about what you're trying to do with Mercaris and why?
Sure. So first of all, this is a great opportunity. It's a great crowd, and I enjoyed the discussion this morning. I hope it continues, the trend continues after lunch. I have worked for a long time where sort of markets meet environmental performance. The idea of, people expressed it in varying ways this morning, but the idea of externalities, the classic economic definition of an externality is something that's happening, positive or negative, where the cost is borne by the society at large, but the benefit or the cost is not adequately captured by the person that's providing or performing the service. So, for example, if you've got a factory on the side of the river and you're polluting and waste is going into the stream, you're able to, it's not on your books, it's the community downstream that's bearing the cost. And so the idea is, how do you capture that and make sure that we put a value to the various facets of the activity. The positive externality example that is always given is each of us gets a vaccination, let's say, when we're kids, and it benefits us individually, but the net effect of the total population being vaccinated, there's not really a value put on that. But you could also talk about incidences of disease going down. So there's positive and negative externalities, and markets can be a way of capturing that and making sure that people, that value is communicated. So with climate change, the idea was putting a price on carbon. And I know this morning there was some discussion about whether that's a good or a bad thing, but at least it's something now that is out there, people understand it, you can communicate it. And so generally when I talk about markets, I'm talking about sort of the definition of a buyer and seller meeting to discover price. And then for public markets, disseminating that price so the larger society gets a signal. What I've done now, recently, this past year, is started a company that provides market data and trading for organic and non-GMO commodities. So the idea is that, we toss around the word, organics is expensive or more expensive, and that's true, but A, how much more expensive, and B, what does that mean? I would say that it's that delta between a bushel of organic corn and conventional corn is what we as a society are saying we're willing to pay for, pick your reason, soil health or decreased pesticide use or better farm worker health because they're not exposed to the chemical pesticides. And I think that that's an important data point to communicate in order to make the sector more efficient. If organics is more expensive because your labor costs are more expensive, and that's one thing. If organic is more expensive because there's asymmetric information, or you can't get a bank loan because your banker doesn't understand what your costs are, or you can't get good crop insurance, then that's a problem, and those are transaction costs we can squeeze out of the system. So that's the theory behind the practice of better market information.
So let me make sure I understand this. So the sort of and believe me, I was just the moderator on the morning panel. I say that as a disclosure, but the discussion about the financialization of food, which was seen as a danger by Fred in his book, what you're really saying is you want to create transparent
Right.
commodity markets that will help match buyers and sellers to bring down costs in the organic and non-GMO
Absolutely.
area. And you're obviously not in the derivatives or futures business yet. You're trying to just create a market.
Right, right.
So would the upshot, if you're successful, be essentially a narrowing of the delta between the price of organic and the price of conventional foods?
Yeah, perhaps that's the hope, but for the right reasons. So again, it would be, it's the transaction costs that make markets inefficient that we would, the hope is that you're still getting an accurate price. The grower is still getting a fair price for his or her crop. The consumer is getting a price, and maybe it's maybe it's some of the middlemen that, or maybe it's the fact that you don't have to self-insure, so you can, costs can come down. So that's the idea. But yeah, I'm all about putting a dollar value on things like that.
And just one more question. We've all seen the video of people yelling at each other in the, I think it's the Chicago, is it Mercantile Exchange where the commodities are traded? You're not, I assume you're in a world where you're not bringing people physically together. Is this a digital exchange of some kind?
Yeah, that's been one of the biggest changes of these commodity markets. That and commodities exchange, since we're talking about regulation, this is something that both organic and the larger sort of commodities markets, this all got started with a bunch of guys meeting in Chicago and standing around in a circle and trading contracts. And that was in 1848 that the first cash market contracts started trading. Regulation didn't catch up with what was going on in Chicago till, the 1920s and the first Commodity Exchange Act in the 1930s. And so, to a certain extent, the market, the regulatory regime, when you're talking about commodities, has lagged, has a history of lagging what you're actually seeing from consumers or from the sector as a whole. And organics is similar. Organics have been around for a long time, and it wasn't until the USDA in this country did the National Organic Program that you said, all right, here are some standards. And markets like that. There's a certain amount of, it's not whether regulation is good or bad, it's about smart regulation being giving a signal and giving some certainty, as Kathleen Merrigan mentioned, and some standards so that everyone's playing by the same rules. So I don't view it as a zero-sum type of situation.
And last question, Kellee, if all goes well, when are you hoping to start trading?
So we should be hosting auctions this fall. We'll start with auctions for various economic reasons. It gets people familiar with the software tools since we're no longer meeting around the pit trading. It helps thicken the markets up so you get some liquidity. We've published that. There's some prices up on our website already, and we'll publish better and better data throughout the year.
Cool. All right, John, now we're not going to talk global exactly with you, but you have certainly had a variety of perspectives on regulation. Currently at the Farmland Trust, family farmer in Illinois. I don't know if I'm remembering right, but did you say you have corn, soybeans, and wind farms on the family farm?
Yes, we do. Wind
That's
turbines on
another
our
regulated
property.
industry there. And then you were at EPA for a time during the George W. Bush administration. So you've been a regulator, you've been regulated, now you're part of the Washington policy discussion. First of all, what do you think about the notion that uniform global regulation is even desirable? Obviously, it would make it easier to move agricultural goods around. The flip side, if you're either a European or an American, is, what if the European system becomes the global standard rather than, say, the American system?
Well, I think that's the big fear, obviously. I appreciated Kelly's remark about, regulation isn't all bad, and I think too often, particularly in the production sector of agriculture, we kind of skip over that fact because we all live by regulations and it provides some fair play and some public trust, and so certainly we start with that basis. But it's when you get into all the details that things really get murky. And clearly one of the things that the interests I've always worked with have been very insistent on is sound science being involved in the regulatory decisions we make. And also I'd say my experience at EPA when I was the ag counselor there was a lot of people that take that very seriously.
Everybody doesn't always agree, but there's a high level of fear that, while the goal of having uniform regulation across the globe is certainly a desirous one, that, will it necessarily reflect some of the same fundamental principles and needs and desires that we have in our system that will really make that a realistically attainable goal? And I think therein lies a lot of the challenges and struggles we have as we deal with these issues through, trade agreements and other dialogues where you're addressing environmental kind of regulatory issues.
That was a really diplomatic answer.
Oh,
So do you
thank
think, uniform normalized regulation is a goal that we should at least strive for? I think Kathleen Merrigan said this morning, if I understood her correctly, that there's been progress, at least in the organic front, where the EU and the US have come up with consistent regulations. Is that right, Kellee?
Yeah, I think so. So organic might be an interesting case study for what happens when you really don't have much policy meddling. So organic has grown to what it is without subsidies, really. I mean, it's like 0.00000, 1% of dollars spent on, whether you're talking about research or subsidies or, it's grown on the sheer strength of consumer demand. They have very little marketing budget, so some of the interesting discussion to me, part of the discussion about, sort of the fear that's out there and how, how are these stories and rumors sometimes getting spread. It's kind of happening, through sort of informal channels, because it's not like there's been a concerted marketing effort on behalf of organics. There's not, the sort of quiet, it doesn't necessarily make the headlines all the time, but the fact that the USDA has signed equivalency agreements have now been signed with the EU, with Canada. I believe Miles McAvoy is now working on Japan. So these are opening up new markets and new opportunities. It does not mean there's an end to the debate and controversy. I mean, the National Organic Standard Boards, the battles they have there are kind of epic about what should be allowed and what shouldn't. But it does give it some a framework to operate in, and it's been successful in that sense.
And that's an example of industry that essentially came to Washington and said, set standards, regulate us,
Yep.
because it's
Yeah.
Washington that really built the organic brand, not
Yeah.
advertising, right?
Right,
With
well,
the little sticker.
Yeah, it was, so the sort of nightmare scenario, I don't know what's going to happen with all the different states asking about, asking for, or putting before the voters the question of labeling GMOs. But the nightmare scenario is Washington State has a standard, and Vermont has a standard, and Minnesota has a standard, and now you've got to figure out what non-GMO means across a whole bunch of different state lines. And organic had that problem 15 years ago, and they said, look, enough, we're going to define what it is, and now you can still battle it out if you want, but there's a process to battle it out, and there's some accountability and some standards around it.
So John, I won't let you off the hook. Do you think at least it's a goal worth aspiring to, more consistent regulation across borders?
Oh, I absolutely think it is. I mean, I can't but help listen to the two people on both sides of me here and understand that, we are operating in a global market, especially here in the United States with our farmers. These are barriers to having access to markets. There is a high cost when you have to deal with this hodgepodge of different regulatory schemes. And maybe even more importantly, as Kellee kind of points out, it also, I think, restricts market opportunities. And that's what I think you hear farmers really looking for. What they really want is, give us access to markets, and we'll use our know-how and our technology and the resources we've got to produce for those markets, and produce pretty darned effectively.
So Max or Bill, I'll let either one of you come at this. Do you see opportunities for some sort of meeting of the minds between the U.S., EU, and Japan and other countries? And if so, how?
Want me to go ahead or you?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm going to answer from regulatory perspective. By training, I hope you understand I'm a scientist. I'm working at the regulatory department. As it is, United States and Canada, we have one of the most, my perspective, most pragmatic regulatory approach.
But we allow all these dodgy practices, don't we?
Yes, that's okay. I will say that. But I tell you, I'm in the regulatory. I deal with all over the world. Sometimes I have to have a psychiatrist 24 hours by me, by the way, dealing in the regulatory environment. But you have to understand where the regulatory trends are. Then you really have to understand, in my perspective, to see and what does the fractured global regulatory system is. If you understand the trends, for example, in the United States right now, North America, environmental assessments and environmental, basically, all the regulations are increasing. In EU, you have implementation of the cutoff criteria. But the US goes, as I said, I will not say this more than enough, you have scientific-based risk assessment. If you have to let science prevails, if you don't let the science prevails, innovative democracy in the countries will go down the hill. And you have to let that prevail this. Now, Europe goes cutoff criteria, Europe goes to implementing this cutoff criteria, and I don't know how they can think about, to tell you the truth, revolutionizing the agriculture. South America, now Brazil, is one of the most affected one. They are standing there, they're going toward hazard cutoff criteria. Meanwhile,
Explain what that is. Cutoff criteria?
Yeah. That means in the US and Canada, we go what science tells us. You do the human risk assessment, environmental risk assessment, exposure assessment, mammals, humans, animals, environment, soil, water. That is the science. That is why we have revolutionized agriculture, is not stopping new tools, new innovative molecule coming to this country. We can have it for our growers. They can work on it in terms of resistant management or in terms of devastation. And Europe has gone through, I'm coming from that part of the world, as a US citizen I can say, and if we have potato famine crisis like Ireland had, what are you going to do? How are you going to resolve this? And cutoff criteria is going to tell you, yes, if you have end point is this, that means that molecule will not see the sunlight in the EU. Now, opposite of that, Southern Europe says, no, insect pressure is high, I need something. And food production yield goes down. And so that's a hazard and scientific based. They do not do the risk assessment. They can truly do the risk assessment for aquatic environment or human health. That's the differences. Now, unless, or Asia Pacific, they are evolving they have evolving regulatory system. There is differences between evolved regulatory system versus evolving regulatory system. This is why challenges we have in Asia Pacific country as well is a disadvantage for our growers in this country and Canada. I will tell you that you cannot ship the commodities, ag commodities, to different parts of the world. And you have that, they don't have that tool accessible for their growers, for the modern agricultural tool or locally adapted crop protection for them in their country. They don't have that. So it will, unless right now is a country specific versus regional regulations and country specific versus global joint reviews, global work shares under OECD direction, which US EPA is championing that. Kudos to them, I value them, what they're doing, and this is good for everyone in the regulatory system, for US and other parts of the world. Unless you don't harmonize that, unfortunately it's not gonna happen.
So, I mean, one way to look at the European point of view is to say the phrase you hear is the precautionary principle. They want a better safe than sorry, it would be the cliche to sum it up. First of all, obviously they have the right to do that if they want, but isn't there some logic behind that? Let's really see what's going on before we say yes. That's the first part of the question. And the second is that what you think is happening, or do you think some of these rules are simple protectionism by another name?
I'm not a politician, I will not answer that the different way. Again, I will answer from scientific
Bill, I'm going to
regulatory
ask you the same
perspective.
question.
Bill maybe can answer that better than I do, but it is Probably some maneuvering is there from my perspective. And EU, 21 EU countries. I jokingly say my European cousins always. I'm surprised, I'm very happy to see Airbus 380 is up. And you guys cannot even cooperate or have the same decision sometimes. And I don't blame them. Different country, different perspectives. But precautionary principles to them is important because you have different member states, then you have EU Commission, you have DG Sanko, you have ecosystem. Is not like what we have in the United States. When I refer to pragmatic approach, or Canada, or Australia, as a matter of fact, Australia is the same way. You have everything under one umbrella. And you look in the science part of it, you're doing risk-benefit analysis. But in Europe, risk-benefit analysis totally becomes different. That's where we defer to. And they have a right, they have title for their right, everything they can say. But what is going to happen for future, I do not have the crystal ball, and wait to see another devastation occurs there, where you're going to get how you're going to defend that. And as an example, in this country, if we had Asian soybean rust, if we do not have product right now available for Asian soybean rust, can come from the ocean, from the wind, from the air, from the hurricane, and all those. I imagine, or hits the Midwest, or soybean or corn gets devastated, what are we going to have? Yeah, if you don't have that tool. And Europe, I hope they do not put themselves in that corner.
I see. So you're saying they're putting themselves at risk by
I
not
hope.
having access to the
I
tool.
hope I'm wrong. I hope I stay alive and see it doesn't happen. But I see it from my perspective, they putting themselves to the corner.
Bill? Do you
I
think it's
think-
different cultures, or do you really think it's just a facade for trying to protect local farmers?
Probably a little of both, but I'd also say that again, within these multinational companies, you have differing opinions all the time as well. So you either learn how to live with the system, or you try to mold it and change it. One of the things that we've began to understand that our risk-based assessments in the United States, that's a predictable regulatory path that we can go down, specifically thinking of crop protection products. The precautionary principle leaves a lot of vagaries still out in the open in terms of what, are we going to get an approval next week, or is somebody else going to bring in an objection? Mostly from an emotional perspective, perhaps then the hard science perspective, which is, again, if we believe in science and technology, let's go with the science first. And the industry, we've been putting products out in the market for decades, and we're always learning, but we're always solving science problems by conducting more science, and that's the role that we play. But on the biotech side, let me just comment first on the harmonization. I think we're moving in the right direction. 5 countries just basically agreed to some harmonization principles that would allow themselves to work within a global regulatory structure that's consistent, and that's a great move in the right direction. The problem still with that is that many exporting countries that we export our grain to aren't involved in that. And so it really hasn't, it solves the problem in that we want to get it moving in the right direction. I think that's a platform to do so. But I go back to the years when we were launching Liberty Link soybeans, and the rule is that you could only ship to once our product is deregulated and the others are deregulated in other countries, if there's a country that's classified as a functional regulatory body in the country and they decide to change overnight, all of a sudden they become dysfunctional. But yet they're on the list that you have to follow a certain protocol. And so we were held up on the launch of Liberty Link soybeans while we continued to work with the stakeholders in the grain industry to try to find solutions. And this is why I'm kind of excited about what Kelly's doing, because in her role, she's going to be in that position to look for segregating opportunities in the marketplace, which is very difficult in the grain trade today, to be able to go in and segregate grain going specifically to one location and another location. So entrepreneurs like her will continue to bring new ideas and new technologies to the market that we can adapt with. So I have a lot of great hope that we're moving in that right direction.
I'm going to encourage questions from anyone, so please just take a spot over there. But John, last one for you is going to be a really simplistic question, but try your best. From having sat on both sides of the equation, have we struck the right balance in the U.S. between innovation and regulation? In fact, maybe I should ask, before I even get to that, sorry, I'm going to back up a little. Bill, what does it cost, do you know, roughly speaking, to bring a new crop protection product to market?
Go with Max's numbers.
Max.
$265 million takes 8 to 10 years.
$265 million before you get a revenue.
I'll go to 365 studies almost. You have to submit all the long-term studies, some of them 2-3 years.
But you did say you thought it was a science-based, pragmatic process. Where do you stand, John? Have we gone too far? Do we need to do more or less?
Well, it's difficult for me to assess, whether or not we've gone too far, but I guess I am pleased, when I hear people talk like we have here today, that we do have a system in place, we have a process in place to deal with these issues that I think at least puts us in a place where we have a shot of having, relative fairness, an effective process that we can hold up before the public and say that there is, a fairly rigorous standard that we're applying as we look at all these new chemistries and coming to the market. That I'm not sure I'm aware of anybody else that's doing it better. There's always going to be room for improvement, and we have to remain vigilant to make sure we keep strong science and keep a risk-based kind of attitude in the programs we have in place. But I think we certainly have a program that, as you go to other countries, when I was at EPA, we did a lot of work with Canada trying to harmonize, and it was a standard that I think they aspired to, and we were able to find agreement to put something in place.
I don't see questions, so Kellee, I think to some degree, and please tell me if you disagree, the organic and the non-GMO, the appeal of organic and non-GMO products is partly driven by some distrust of the regulatory system. I think people feel like, am I really going to be protecting my wife among them? What about the chemicals and pesticides on the food? There are certainly some NGOs that have been in the business of stirring up those kinds of anxieties. True, not true? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's funny actually hearing sort of.
So I guess I'm asking you, do you agree that we're regulating the rest of the food enough?
Well, so it's funny going to these different events because you can go to, organic events and, the organic farmers are pretty independent. They're not sure they trust regulation either. Like it seems to be a universal point that people are a little suspicious when you get, regulations in place that things could always become worse some way. And then of course you hear it on the other side as well, the sort of, standard, let markets do what they're going to do, freer markets, that kind of thing. So yeah, there's some fear and some distrust about regulation, no matter what side of the aisle or what side of the sector you're on. I don't know if that answered the question or.
So it did, and I guess the follow-up then is with organics and with non-GMO foods, how is it, because it's not like there are no pesticides on organic foods or no fertilizers, it's just different kinds of pesticides and fertilizers. How is it, do you think, that brand and that industry has won the trust of people like my wife who say, oh, I wanted the organic apples because I know those are okay?
Yeah. I think it's interesting. The congressman who spoke last night, Austin Scott, said, and I've heard this at other events too, organics is still so small. There's still a lot of opportunity for growth. And sometimes there's a lot of fear that, what are these organic folks doing? Is it going to hurt, conventional or industrial agriculture? The panelists this morning, I think if there was one takeaway I might have, something that really made me sit up was that, if you have it's very hard to have it both ways. If people don't understand the food system, you do leave yourself open for someone else to come in and fill in the gap and say, I'll tell you what you should think about this. And so I do think that everybody, like in ag can benefit from more transparency, greater education. Consumers have to do work too. I mean, we have to, we have to be smart consumers, and we have to, read the reports that are out there. And, I'm as guilty as anyone. If it's not in a tweet, it's kind of hard to. But we have to, figure out how better to produce information and consume it. But I think there are some real differences. I mean, organic is, one of the reasons it's resonated is at the end of the day, when you get past all the messaging and spin, there is something very attractive about saying, you know what, I don't know if the pesticide, I'm a dedicated coffee drinker. I drink coffee no matter what study comes out saying I should or should not be doing it. And so I think on the part of the consumer, there's this, well, we don't know. I don't know if the nutritive benefits of organic will eventually be proven out to be superior or not. I do know that there are plenty of good studies saying there is lower pesticide load, lower pesticide residue on most organic production. I'm not willing to take the chance that 20 years from now we'll figure out, actually, this is something that we really don't want in our food system. So I think a lot of people are responding to that. There's great studies, by the way, on why people buy organic. And there is a segment of the population that likes the idea that they actually are, it's a production system that provides some demonstrated environmental benefits, lack of herbicide resistance and corn borer resistance. There's some that say they, can tell the difference in taste. There's some that say they're doing it for, for the sense of food safety. So pick a reason. Tom Vilsack, actually, Secretary Vilsack gave a great speech in this very room a week ago today about the fact that he likes organic because he's concerned about rural economies. And the fact that the average American farmer is 59 years old, closing in on 60, the average organic farmer is 46 years old. The fact that on-farm practices means you employ more people. You can employ more people for organic production. So sort of pick a reason, and there's somebody out there who is attracted to that reason. So.
Great answer. Please.
Doug Nelson with CropLife America. I think we've heard, Mark, today the great difference between, in a sense, the EU system and the US system, whether it be science versus precautionary principle or the rest. The new trade and investment partnership, TTIP, which is going to start being negotiated this summer between the EU and US, has some real problems in terms of harmonization of those two regulatory schemes. And so if they're not able to harmonize, which I would think would be the most likely outcome, one other potential outcome is mutual recognition of each other's regulatory schemes. And so I'd be interested in the panel's reaction to that, because that would be an implicit recognition by the US of the precautionary principle approach of the EU.
Okay.
Well, I don't think we should give up our risk-based assessment and lose our science, our approach to this science. I think that's acknowledging that whatever goes, goes. And that's not what we've been successful with, just in terms of a mutual recognition. I think if there's a mutual recognition that we can sell our products in those countries, that if they're produced in the U.S. and going abroad, and they'll accept our MRLs and things of this nature, and say, okay, let's just draw the line. We're never going to agree on this definition, then so be it. But from my perspective, I think it'd be a step in the wrong direction to abandon science.
Can I comment on something?
Please, Max.
Doug, thanks for bringing this. It's very important. I didn't know I shake my head or down or up, but I'm glad you asked that. I agree with what Bill is saying. We should not let, as I said, maybe I always tell this to my kids, and we can't take for granted what we have in this country. As a young boy coming in this country, I'm not telling story here, I saw Ronald Reagan and also our peanut farmers, Jimmy Carter, coming, and one losing, one shaking hand, packing bag, going home. I said, wow, what a wonderful country. Tank didn't roll over, fight didn't break, and machete didn't come, and they said, wow, I love it. I'm staying here. I'm not coming back, my dad and mom. But I'll tell you that. I say what Bill is saying. I endorse 100% that we should not let this take over, basically something else can overcome the science we have. That's why, what I agree what John was saying, in the US system, I know we have a lot of complexity. We do. That's why I'm having a gray hair, by the way. And we do. It's not a piece of cake here either, US or Canada. We have a lot of complexity. And it takes a long time, costs a lot for us, and there is sometimes not too much incentive for R&D company like us. But we can let something else take over what science dictates us. This is why we are, as a naturalized US citizen, I can say, this is a success of our country here. Even I've been in the farming community and all those. And if we let anything else take over what science dictates to us, unfortunately, again, will not be productive system.
Great. So we've talked a little about information. We've talked about these regulatory schemes. One area where there seems to be a threat of the demand for information creating really complicated regulatory schemes is GMOs. Kellee, I know you said you were going to try to deal with also non-GMO crops on your platform. You followed the debate about labeling. People in this room, companies in this room, spent a fair amount of money to defeat the initiative in California. They were successful.
There's some irresponsible science out there. I think the best way to make people accountable is make them, label it, regulate it. Don't stand in the way of that, because, you bring people into a system where they have to be accountable for what they label, for what they say, and now you've got a different set of stakeholders, and it actually makes people, I think, it makes it harder to put misinformation out there. So, my advice to all of the folks, and there were a lot of big food companies that spent a lot of money defeating it, is, that money might be better spent on education and on, making sure that each side has its sort of ducks in a row, rather than, this is like the typical rent-seeking behavior when more money is spent on the lobbying efforts than actually is, spent on the development of new products and markets and that kind of thing. So yeah, I would bet on labeling. I think the other thing is, if you take out it is a very emotional topic, and what do GMOs do or not do, and I would say there's a lot of potential there to really improve, to improve the products that we have out there with certain types of genetic engineering. But labeling, look, I heard someone speak last week and said, we have concentrate or not for concentrate labels on our orange juice. Which one is better? I don't know. I can't tell the difference between the taste, to tell you the truth. But in no other area have we fought so hard against labeling, and it's just a fact of life for a lot of our products that we eat. There's no, you let the consumer decide. There's actually been a couple of good studies that show once labeling is there, it doesn't actually really change consumer behavior that much either. So that's one way of looking at it. I would bet on labeling becoming more prevalent rather than less.
I'm going to take some questions, and I actually want to hear from everyone else on this topic, but let's do the questions first. Kai?
Hi there, Kai Robertson. This question is primarily targeted at John, and it pulls together some comments we've heard earlier in the panel about the psychology and how people make decisions, and there was an example given that a farmer applies extra fertilizer to increase yield, just not knowing exactly how much yield you're going to get. So there's always this interplay between regulation and voluntary practices, and somebody told me I was part of a food waste panel myself 2 weeks ago, and somebody was talking about, well, how do we get farmers to adopt better practices? And this individual mentioned that the American Farmland Trust is offering, or part of a program, compensating farmers for the potential yield loss if they adopt better practices, since one doesn't know what the outcome might be. And I'm assuming that the person who was talking about this program is, was knowledgeable, and you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting.
So now that's, I presume, an example of a voluntary program. And I'd love to hear how you think, should that be regulatory? Because a lot of times I hear from the multinational companies I work with, we want regulation to level the playing field. There's actually a benefit to regulation in many cases, but there's always an interplay. How much regulation is too much, and when does a voluntary effort like what you're doing perhaps need to go to the extra step and level the playing field for everybody?
I think we clearly have to exhaust every opportunity to try to take a more voluntary type approach first. I happen to believe very strongly that farmers want to do the right thing. There's a lot of incentives for them to do the right thing. If we put too much fertilizer on our fields and it gets off into the water, that's a lot of money down the drain. That's expensive stuff that we're buying and putting out there. And I think that there's an opportunity to work with farmers to try to continue to fine-tune how do we manage the inputs that we use that can help result in some real environmental improvement. Clearly, the global positioning technology is probably the best example we've had here more recently, especially in my part of the world, central United States, where increased data, a much more sophisticated approach, a precise approach in terms of how we're applying stuff is really very valuable. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to do that kind of thing. One of the things you learn a lot, or you hear a lot from farmers is, farmers learn best from other farmers, and that's really kind of what we're trying to do with the BMP challenge, Best Management Practice Challenge that you're talking about is, give some people some incentive, or maybe more importantly, some protection for taking a risk and trying something different, and then make sure you leverage that with other farmers. Because if it works on somebody else's farm, that's going to be highly credible for the next farmer. And I think that's a way that we can continue to do a lot with to get the environmental improvement we're talking about. The other thing I would say is, and this has been said a lot today, it is an incredibly complex system that we're working with. We're out there on our farm right now applying things in the hopes that we're going to have good growing conditions. I don't know if it's going to rain next week, or if the rains are going to stop, or what the July or August is going to look like. So it's not a real black or white decision that farmers have to make. And what they've got to do is look at the risks that they have in front of them and do the best possible job they can of balancing those with the information they have available. And I think if we think about those problems in that way and from that farmer's perspective, then it leads us to a little more of a collaborative kind of approach of saying, well, okay, how do we deal with this so that we can both get the environmental improvement, but also keep farms viable?
John, isn't part of the problem that fertilizer costs are really relatively low among the scale of different spends that the farmer has, and the failure to apply enough would exact a very high price? So
it sure hasn't felt that way.
Okay.
Fertilizer prices have been very expensive recently, and I think probably over time there's some truth to that.
I heard this from a guy named Jeff Lott, who does statistical analysis. But
well, I think more recently you've seen some run up in fertilizer prices.
Okay.
And, it's a market; it goes up and down too. But one of the things that's been interesting in my area, and I think across the United States, you're seeing a lot of interest in cover crops. And even when I came to EPA 9 years ago, I think there are a lot of farmers saying, oh, I don't know if that'll work. But now they're interested. And yes, part of it's because of environmental impacts, but also I think part of it is because fertilizer prices gotten high enough and they see some fertility benefits. And so that's another good example of where I think we have an opportunity to take a little more of a collaborative approach in a complex system and allow us to meet multiple objectives.
My name's Darren Anderson. I'm from a company called Vive Crop Protection. We're based in Toronto. We're a startup, about 30 people. And there's been some pretty big numbers that have been thrown around. $265 million to develop a new product, 10 years. We're developing products based off of already existing molecules. And even so, there's, Europe will be the very last jurisdiction we'll register in just because of the regulatory uncertainty. So we're definitely impacted by that issue, and European growers aren't going to have access to our products for a while because of that. It occurs to me that one of the big issues, if you think about the European perspective becoming more common globally, is actually just whether or not even the big companies would do discovery at that point. At this point, there's, fewer than 10 companies in the world that really have a serious discovery program. And I'm curious, if the European regulatory system came across the rest of the globe, particularly the industrial folks, do you guys feel like you would still do discovery, or would that pretty much just mean no more molecules?
I don't want to speak for Bayer because I'm no longer affiliated with them. But if it was my money, you'd find your opportunities still in that market, but it would the risk would go up substantially.
From
And
BASF,
we're out of time pretty much, but
okay,
go ahead,
BASF
Max.
perspective the same, but if it's not, world is not only the Europe, different regions, South America, Asia Pacific, North America, if you find a market there, if justifies what you investing in R&D, yeah, go for it.
We are out of time, but I'm just really curious quickly. Bill, Max, John, do you agree with Kellee that the GMO labeling battle has, in a sense, already been lost, and it's time to sort of make peace and figure out a way to make it work for everyone? I'm paraphrasing. Is that what you were kind of saying?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
You said it much more eloquently, but.
No. I just want to make sure I'm accurate. Quickly, all three of you. Bill.
I'd make peace, yes. It's always the best route. I don't know if it's died down. I think as long as people have a very strong opinion one way or the other, there's always going to be these battles. I did hear this morning that Unilever, as an example, they have a sustainability profile that they're asking all their suppliers to meet, and all the way to the farm level. And farmers are making that pledge and abiding by those standards that they've established. So their point was, we don't need to label it on our products. What we need to do is just, they can go on our website and they can look at the sustainability standards that we've established and trust the fact that they're marketed and sold this way all the way back to the farm level. One way of looking at it.
John, Max, real quick.
I don't think the issue is not going to go away. There's enough interest and public pressure. I hope that we haven't closed the door on looking at other alternatives to providing more information. Kathleen Merrigan mentioned something this morning that I thought was kind of an intriguing idea of an alternative approach to letting those that are selling those products have a means by which they can make the claim that they've got organic, non-GMO, short of having to label everything, which I think really opens up a lot of regulatory, cans of worms that are going to be exceedingly difficult to deal with.
Mark, from my perspective, I don't see the added values, but everyone entitled, whereas I will say that this is a democracy. We may be sitting here after 10 years still discussing, by the way, by next decade this, but I don't see the values of really adding it there, but may go to that direction.